When I heard the faint howl under the bush, my breath caught in my chest because I knew it was no accident. At first, I thought it was the wind, a thin whistle moving through the trees the way it sometimes does in late autumn. But then it came again, softer, weaker, and full of something that felt almost human, a cry. My heart began to pound. I froze on the narrow forest path, gripping my walking stick, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I was an old man after all, and sometimes your ears play tricks when you're alone in the woods. But no, there it was again, a broken whimper, so close it made my stomach tighten. I stepped carefully off the path, branches scratching at my coat. The sound grew clearer, and then I saw it. A small wolf pup collapsed in the shadows beneath a tangle of dry grass and bramble. Skin and bones, the ribs sharp against its matted fur. Its eyes half closed, its breath shallow, its body trembling in the cold. For a moment, my legs locked. A wolf, even a pup, meant danger. Where there was one, there could be others. I turned my head, scanning the silent trees. Every muscle in my body braced, but nothing moved. My first thought was to back away, to leave it, to pretend I hadn't seen. The forest has its own laws, I told myself. And yet, those eyes, they weren't wild in that moment. They weren't fierce. They were pleading, weak, cloudy, but locked on me with a desperation I'll never forget. Something inside me broke. I knelt down, every joint stiff, and whispered, though I don't know why, "Easy now, easy." My hand shook as I reached toward the ground. The pup flinched, a twitch of fear, but it didn't have the strength to move. Its tongue slid weakly across its lips, searching for water that wasn't there. I carried a small flask in my coat. My fingers fumbled with the cap, and I poured a trickle onto the lid. I slid it closer. For a second, the pup didn't react. Then its nose twitched, and slowly, painfully, it pushed its muzzle forward. The sound of its tongue lapping against the tin was so fragile it brought tears into my eyes. I broke off a corner of the bread I had wrapped in paper for my walk. I crumbled it into tiny pieces, softer so its weak jaws could manage. The pup chewed with pitiful effort, but it swallowed, and I felt something shift inside me, a weight, a fear, lifting, replaced with something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. I don't know how long I sat there. The forest faded away, the cold air, the ache in my knees. There was only that fragile heartbeat in front of me. I stroked the ground beside it with the back of my hand, showing I meant no harm. The pup's eyes met mine, and in that instant, I swear to you, he did not look at me like a beast. He looked at me like a child. It was the kind of gaze that rips right through every layer of what you think you know. Wild animals are supposed to fear us, to hate us, to bite or run, but he didn't. He simply looked, as if saying, "Please, don't leave me." I couldn't carry him far. He was too frail, and I was too old, but I lifted him gently into my arms, my coat wrapped around his tiny frame, and carried him out of the brambles. Each step felt heavier than the last, my heart racing with fear of what might happen if the mother returned, if the pack found me. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting a flash of gray fur, a set of glowing eyes, but the forest remained silent. I laid him in a bed of dried leaves near a fallen log, closer to the path, where at least he would not be hidden and alone. I gave him the last of my water, and when his eyelids fluttered shut, I thought perhaps he had gone. My throat tightened, grief for a creature I had known less than an hour. But then his chest lifted again, shallow but steady. I sat there until the sun began to sink. My old bones stiffened, and I knew I could not stay the night. I whispered to him one last time, "Fight, little one." When I rose to leave, he lifted his head ever so slightly, his gaze following me. I will never forget it. I thought I had done what I could. I thought I would walk away, carry the memory, and that would be the end of it. But it was not the end, not even close. I thought I had saved him once and would never see him again. But nature had a very different plan. I couldn't get him out of my mind. All that night, I lay awake in my small cabin, staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint sound of his shallow breathing, as if he were still cradled in my arms. The forest outside was silent, but inside my head the silence was louder than any howl. I told myself not to go back. I told myself it was foolish, that nature has its own rules, that the little wolf had either found the strength to live or he hadn't. My part was done, but by morning I knew I couldn't resist. My legs carried me back down the path, even though my mind argued the whole way. I whispered to myself, like a stubborn old man, "You won't find him. You'll find nothing." The forest seemed to mock me with its stillness. I stepped into the clearing where I had left him. My heart fell. The leaves were scattered, but the place was empty. For a moment, the weight of it crushed me. I gripped my walking stick, breath shaking, whispering, "I was too late. I was too late." Then I noticed something. On the edge of the brambles, a small tuft of gray fur clung to the thorn. I bent down, my hands trembling as I plucked it free. Coarse, wiry, unmistakable. My throat tightened. He had been here. He had risen. He had moved. I searched the ground like a madman, and there, faint impressions in the soft soil, small tracks, uneven, wobbly, as if each step had cost him every bit of strength, but they were steps, steps away from death. I knelt there in the dirt longer than I should have, staring at those fragile marks, torn between joy and dread. Joy that he had lived, dread of what might have become of him. My heart was pulled in two directions, and I could hardly breathe. What if he collapsed again? What if the forest swallowed him whole? The thought gnawed at me, but still I clung to the tracks as proof he had fought. The day stretched on, and I wandered deeper than I intended, following signs that vanished and reappeared like ghosts. At last, as dusk began to bleed through the trees, I stopped. My legs ached and the shadows pressed in. I told myself I had to turn back, that I would never find him again. And then, just as I turned toward home, the sound came, a long, trembling howl rolling through the forest air. I froze where I stood, every hair on my arms rising. It was not the strong, confident call of a pack. It was thin, wavering, but alive. My chest tightened. The voice of the pup carried through the trees. I gripped my stick tighter, listening. Another howl followed, a little stronger, drawn out, filled with something I can only call searching. It wasn't the cry of hunger alone. It was something more. It was reaching for me, and in that moment, my heart nearly stopped. Because it felt as though he wasn't calling to the forest. He was calling to me. I wanted to answer. My lips parted, a strange urge rising to howl back, to let him know I was there. But the sound caught in my throat. What would it mean? What would it bring? I stood frozen, shivering, the twilight pressing in, my own breath misting in the cold. The howls grew faint, drifting farther until they melted into silence. I was left alone, the trees whispering above me, my body trembling as if I had seen a ghost. I whispered aloud, though no one could hear me. I heard you, little one. The walk home was slow. My legs were heavy, my thoughts heavier. I tried to tell myself I had imagined it, that the sound could have been another wolf, a trick of the distance, even the creak of the woods in the wind. But in my chest, I knew better. It was him, and he had called to me. I thought that would be the last time. I thought that would be the closest I'd ever come to him again. A single echo in the twilight, a memory already fading by the time I reached my cabin door. But nature had other plans. The days slipped by, but the memory of that distant howl never left me. Each evening, as the sun dipped and the sky turned red, I found myself listening, straining for that fragile voice again, and though silence answered me, something inside urged me back to the woods. I don't know if it was hope or madness, but my feet carried me there again and again, as if the forest itself was pulling me toward something. It was on one of those walks, a gray morning with fog hanging low among the trees, that it happened. I reached the edge of a small clearing, the grass still wet with dew, when I felt it before I saw it. That prickle at the back of the neck, that certainty that eyes are on you. I froze mid-step, my stick pressed into the earth, and then, through the mist, I saw him. A young wolf, no longer skin and bone but lean and steady, his coat thicker now, patched but strong. His legs looked surer beneath him, though he moved with the caution of one who had survived too much. He stood at the far side of the clearing, half hidden by the ferns, watching me. My first instinct was fear. My breath locked in my chest, and I told myself, this is the moment. He'll bolt, or worse, he'll charge. My pulse hammered so hard it felt like it echoed in the trees. I wanted to step back, but my body wouldn't move. Yet he didn't run, he didn't lunge, he didn't bare his teeth. He simply stood there, still, alert, eyes fixed on mine. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, two creatures caught in a silence deeper than the forest itself. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the branches, and in those eyes, no wild rage, no hunger, no fear, only recognition. My hand trembled on the walking stick. "Easy," I whispered without knowing why. My voice cracked in the damp air, and then he did something that shattered every rule I thought I knew. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, out from the ferns into the open light. His paws pressed into the grass with measured grace, as if each movement was chosen, not driven by instinct. He came no closer than a dozen paces, but then he stopped. His head lowered, his front paws stretched forward, his shoulders sank. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't submission in the animal sense either. It was something else, something I can only describe as acknowledgement. A gesture so human in its meaning that it made my eyes sting. I couldn't breathe. My knees nearly buckled under me, and I realized in that trembling instant, he was not just any wolf. He was my wolf, the same fragile creature I had lifted from the brambles, only now stronger, standing on his own legs, staring at me as though the bond we had forged in those desperate moments still bound us together. He looked at me not as a wild beast would look at a man. He looked at me as if I were part of his story. He looked at me as if I were his own. The weight of it struck me so hard I had to close my eyes. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to shout to the trees that this could not be real. But when I opened my eyes again, he was still there, holding my gaze with a steadiness that left me trembling. I thought that was all it was. A moment of recognition, a fleeting miracle between man and beast. I thought he had simply remembered me, the way a creature might recall a scent, a face, a kindness once given. But I was wrong. It went deeper than memory, deeper than chance. And I was about to learn just how far this connection could reach. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at one another across that damp clearing. My breath came shallow, and my chest ached from the weight of it. I told myself to back away, to leave before the moment shattered into danger. But something in his eyes rooted me to the earth. Then he moved, not toward me in attack, not away from me in flight, but sideways, slow, deliberate, circling, his gaze never breaking from mine. My knuckles whitened around my walking stick. Every step he took sent a tremor through me, and yet there was no menace in it. It was not the restless pacing of a predator. It was something different, almost inviting. He circled once, twice, and then began to drift back toward the shadows of the trees, pausing to glance over his shoulder. It was absurd, I know, but in that moment I felt the meaning as clear as words. Follow me. I hesitated. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. What was I doing? An old man, chasing after a wolf into the forest. Every story I'd ever heard screamed at me to turn back, but there was another voice, quieter yet stronger, whispering from deep inside. Trust him. So I stepped forward. One step, then another, each one a battle against my own fear. And with each step, he moved again, always just far enough to keep the distance between us, always watching to be sure I was still there. We wove deeper into the woods, the fog curling around us, the trees pressing close. My legs ached, my breath burned, but I couldn't stop. I was caught in something greater than reason. At last, he slowed. He stopped beside a fallen log, its bark stripped, the ground around it disturbed. He looked back at me and then lowered his head to the earth. There, scattered among the leaves, were the remains of something small, feathers, bones, the unmistakable traces of a meal. My throat tightened. He had hunted. He had fed. He had survived. And it struck me like a blow. He had brought me here to show me. I stared at the fragile remains in silence, then at him. He stood tall now, no longer the trembling skeleton I had lifted from the brambles. His eyes shone in the dim light, and what I saw in them made my knees weaken. It was gratitude, wild, fierce, wordless, but gratitude all the same. I had never seen such a thing in an animal's gaze. It was human, and not human all at once, something beyond the limits of what I thought possible. It pierced me so deeply that tears burned in my eyes. I wanted to speak, but my voice would not come. Instead, I simply nodded, a foolish old man, nodding to a wolf as if to say, I understand. And in that stillness, I swear the bond between us grew into something I could feel, not in my mind, not in my bones, but in the very air around us. A thread connecting two lives that should never have touched, pulling us toward a truth older than either of us could grasp. I stood there until my legs shook with exhaustion. He remained silent, watchful, the forest around us holding its breath. At last, he gave a short, sharp snort, almost like a sigh, and turned back into the trees. I thought that was it. I thought I had been given a gift few men ever receive, to see a wild creature not as an enemy, not as prey or predator, but as something more. I thought the chapter had closed with that look of gratitude, that unspoken message shared in the stillness of the woods. I told myself our story had ended there, but I was wrong. It was only the beginning. After that day in the woods, I kept returning, hoping to see him again. Each morning I walked the same paths, scanning the clearings, listening for the faint snap of branches or the whisper of paws through the leaves. But the forest remained silent. The wolf was gone. At first I told myself he would return, that he was watching me even if I couldn't see him. I spoke softly into the trees as I walked, foolish words of reassurance to a creature that might not even be there. I know you're alive. I know you remember. But with every empty day, the hope inside me began to thin. By the end of the week, I had to face it. He had left. He had returned to the life he was born for, the pack, the wilderness, the law of the wild. And who was I to expect otherwise? I sat alone by the fire one evening, staring into the flames until my eyes burned. My heart ached with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. Pride that I had given him a chance, sorrow that the bond I felt so strongly was only ever meant to be brief. My hands trembled on my knees as I whispered to myself, I saved him. And that's enough. That has to be enough. The words were meant to soothe, and for a moment they did. I felt a kind of peace, a weary acceptance. What more could I ask? To know that somewhere in the endless woods, a life carried on because I had not turned away. That was a gift in itself, but the heart does not surrender so easily. Even as I tried to accept the silence, a part of me listened. Each night, as the wind curled around the cabin, I held my breath, waiting. Nothing came. Until one night, when everything changed. It was late. The fire had burned down to embers, and I was drifting between waking and sleep when it broke the silence. A howl, long, rising, strong. Not the thin, broken cry of a pup clinging to life, but the full-bodied voice of a young wolf. The sound filled the night air, so sharp and clear it sent shivers racing down my spine. I sat up, clutching the edge of the bed. My breath caught. My heart knew before my mind could catch up. It was him. I staggered to the door, threw it open, and stepped out into the cold night. The moon was pale above the treetops, and the forest glowed silver. The howl came again, echoing through the valleys, rolling across the hills like a wave, and then another voice, then another. My blood froze. It wasn't just one wolf, it was many. A chorus rising and falling, weaving together, voices layered in a wild, trembling harmony that made the air itself seem alive. I gripped the doorframe, barely able to stand. The sound was terrifying in its power, yet it shook me with something greater than fear, because inside that chorus, I could hear him. His voice was there, clear as a thread woven through cloth, rising above the others, calling. And in that strange music, I felt it, not a cry of hunger, not the cold declaration of a pack marking its ground, but something else. It was recognition, a summons, a reminder. In that chorus, I heard the voice of not one creature, but many. Not a lone survivor, but a family. And the tears came, hot against my weathered cheeks. I pressed my hands to my face, trembling. My heart whispered words I dared not speak aloud. They know me. He has told them about me. I know how foolish it sounds. I know what anyone would say, that wolves do not share such things, that they do not sing for men, that what I heard was only instinct, only wild law, and yet my bones told me otherwise. I thought I had accepted the ending. I thought the chapter was closed and the story finished. I thought the silence of the forest was final, but I was wrong. That howl, that chorus, was no ending. It was a beginning I could not yet understand. The night of that chorus haunted me. I barely slept, every rise and fall of their voices echoing inside my chest long after the forest had gone silent. By morning, I felt like a man caught between two worlds, the quiet, lonely life I knew, and the wild, untamed bond pulling me deeper into the woods. I told myself not to go. I told myself I was too old, that I was chasing madness. But by afternoon, I found my boots on the trail again, the staff in my hand, my heart pounding with something I could only call destiny. The air was heavy, the light dim as the clouds stretched low. I followed the path until I reached the wide clearing near the fallen oak. My breath quickened before I even saw them. The forest was too still, too hushed, as if it were holding its breath. And then they appeared. From the shadows of the trees, one by one, gray forms slipped into the open. Not one, not two, but many. A pack, real wolves, full-grown, lean and strong, their coats glinting under the pale light. My knees went weak. I froze where I stood. The staff trembled in my grip. My whole body screamed for me to turn and run, but I was rooted in place, my heart hammering so hard it shook my chest. The stories of wolves filled my mind, teeth, blood, the circle of predators closing. And then I saw him. Among them, taller now, his frame filled out with strength, but his eyes the same, was the one I had saved. The pup no longer. He stood between the others, his gaze fixed on me with that same piercing recognition. My breath caught, my throat closed. Against all reason, he was here. The wolves spread across the clearing, their paws silent on the grass. The largest among them, the alpha, unmistakable, stepped forward. His head was high, his shoulders heavy with power. His eyes burned into me with a force that made my chest ache. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. This was it. The world held still. The air was so taut with silence that it hurt to breathe. And then, before I could blink, the young wolf moved. He stepped out from the line of his kin, padding across the grass with sure, deliberate strides. My heart raced, terror surging up my spine. I braced for the unthinkable, for teeth, for claws, but instead, he came to my side and sat. He sat down on the earth beside me, his body close enough that I could feel the warmth rising from his fur, his head lifted high, his gaze steady toward the pack. The message was clear, undeniable. He was telling them, "This one is mine. This one belongs with me." I nearly collapsed from the force of it. My chest filled with a soundless sob, and my eyes blurred with tears I could not stop. The pack did not attack. They did not growl. They did not advance. They looked at me, and in their eyes there was no hatred, no hunger, only something deeper, curiosity, wariness, and a strange, piercing acknowledgement. I will never forget it. Wolves looked at me, I whispered to myself, and in their gaze there was no malice. It was too much for my old heart to hold. The forest spun around me, every breath sharp and raw. I stood trembling, one hand clutching my stick, the other hanging useless at my side. I thought it would end there. I thought the moment would pass, that the pack would accept his silent claim, turn, and vanish back into the trees. I thought it was miracle enough to stand alive among them, to be spared by their law. But I was wrong. They did not leave. What came next was something I still struggle to believe, something that defies everything I thought I knew about the wild. It was impossible, and yet I saw it with my own eyes. He sat at my side, the young wolf I had once carried in my arms, and the clearing seemed to hold its breath. My whole body shook with the weight of it, but I didn't dare move. My eyes stayed locked on the others, their yellow glint steady in the dim light. Then the alpha moved. The largest of them all stepped forward, silent as a shadow, his shoulders rolling with raw strength. His head was high, his stride unhurried, and with every step my heart thundered louder in my chest. My grip on the staff was useless. I knew it would not save me. My knees weakened, and sweat broke cold across my neck. This was the moment I had always feared. He came to a stop a few paces from me. The air between us felt alive, crackling, so heavy I could hardly breathe. His eyes locked on mine, burning, unreadable. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My mind screamed, "This is the end." I braced myself for teeth, for the leap, for the tearing of flesh. My breath stalled in my chest, but it never came. Instead, the great wolf lowered his head, slowly, with deliberate weight, his neck bent, his muzzle dipping toward the earth, not in fear, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. I gasped, a sound torn from my throat without thought. My knees trembled so violently I nearly collapsed. My whole body wanted to cry out, to wail at the sky for what I was seeing. The wolf, the alpha, the leader, the law of the pack, had bowed to me, and behind him, the others stood silent, their bodies steady, their eyes calm. Not one moved forward, not one bristled with aggression. They stood as though the gesture had spoken for them all. I staggered back a step, pressing a hand against my chest as if to hold my racing heart inside. Tears blurred my vision, hot and unrelenting. I whispered into the thick silence, "This can't be real. This can't be real." Yet it was, because in that moment I felt it as clearly as the earth beneath my feet. They had accepted me, not as prey, not as threat, but as something else, as part of them. The words burned in my throat, unspoken, but undeniable. They have made me one of their own. I could not bear it. The weight of that truth struck me harder than any fear ever had. My chest ached, my vision swam, my hands shook so violently I dropped my staff into the grass. It didn't matter. I was beyond fear, beyond reason. The young wolf beside me lifted his head then, his gaze moving from the alpha to me. In his eyes, I saw it plain as day. The bridge between two worlds, the bond no man could have imagined. He had brought me here, to this moment. He had given me to them, and they had taken me in. I don't know how long we stood like that, the forest silent around us, the air thrumming with a secret too great for words. My breath came shallow, my body trembling as though I were standing at the edge of heaven itself. At last the alpha lifted his head again, slow and steady. His eyes met mine one final time. There was no threat there, no hunger, only something older, deeper, respect perhaps, or recognition. I will never know for certain. Then he turned, padding back toward his place among the pack. I let out a cry, half sob, half laugh, and bent to snatch my staff with shaking fingers. My knees nearly gave beneath me. My heart could not hold what I had just seen. I thought it was over. I thought the miracle had reached its peak and could go no further. I told myself, this is it. This is the moment I will carry to my grave. But I was wrong. The forest was not finished with me yet. Nature had one more blow to deliver, one more strike straight to the heart. And when it came, it left me more shattered than anything before. The clearing was still trembling inside me, my chest aching from what I had just witnessed. The alpha had bowed. The pack had stood calm, and I, an old man with nothing to give but a flask of water and a crumb of bread, had been accepted in their circle. My body felt weightless, as though I had stepped out of time itself, and then, the moment that will never leave me, the young wolf moved again, the one I had saved, the one who had carried my memory back to his kin. He stepped close, closer than he ever had before. My breath caught, every nerve in my body screaming for me to flinch, to move, to protect myself. But I didn't. I couldn't. He came so near I could feel the heat of his breath against my skin. Then, slowly, gently, he lifted his muzzle and touched the back of my weathered hand with the tip of his nose. I nearly collapsed from the shock of it. It was not the brush of an animal testing or sniffing. It was something deliberate, something chosen, a gesture so tender it broke me wide open. My throat burned, and I felt tears stream hot down my face. That single touch said more than 1,000 words ever could. It was gratitude. It was trust. It was a bond sealed between two beings who should have never met on such terms. The moment passed in silence, a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. He stepped back and without a sound turned his gaze toward the pack. As if in agreement, the others shifted. The alpha took the lead, and with slow, measured steps, the wolves began to move. Not rushing, not scattering, but flowing together like a river of gray fur back into the waiting trees. Their paws made almost no sound against the earth. One by one, they disappeared into the shadows, their eyes vanishing like fading stars. And then there was nothing, only silence. I stood frozen in the clearing, my legs stiff, my body trembling as if it had been struck by lightning. My staff dangled from my hand. I could not move, could not even breathe properly. The weight of what I had seen pressed down on me, crushing and yet lifting at the same time. Inside me was a knowing I cannot explain, that I had been allowed a glimpse of something sacred, something older than man, older than story, a law of nature not written in teeth and blood, but in bonds unseen, in gratitude, in recognition. And it had been shown to me. The truth of it cut into my heart with unbearable force. I whispered through my tears, That beast showed me something that changed my life. I staggered to the fallen log and sat, burying my face in my hands. My body shook with sobs I had not known I could still cry. Not out of sorrow, not out of fear, but out of sheer awe. The forest stood around me in absolute stillness, as though it too had witnessed the pact and would keep it in silence forever. My heart pounded, and my hands tingled as if they still held the warmth of his touch. For a long time I remained there, watching the last ripples of their presence fade into the woods. Slowly, the birds began to call again, and the wind stirred the branches overhead. Life returned, but I was no longer the same man who had stepped into that clearing. At last, when my legs could carry me, I rose. Each step back down the path felt heavier, as if the forest itself wanted to hold me there. I thought I would wake the next morning and feel it slip from me like a dream. I thought the memory would fade, growing soft and unreal with time, leaving me to wonder if it had happened at all. But I was wrong. The memory did not fade. It burned brighter. It carved itself into me, each detail sharper than the last. The bow of the alpha, the eyes of the pack, the soft press of a nose against my hand. And I knew, as I stumbled back toward the cabin, that no matter how many days I had left, I would carry this with me until the end. I walked home that day like a man stumbling through a dream. My legs barely obeyed me, my chest still shaking with sobs that would not come out fully, my hands tingling as though they still held the warmth of a wolf's breath. When the cabin finally appeared through the trees, it didn't feel like a return to safety. It felt like stepping out of one world and back into another, a smaller one, a quieter one, but somehow less real than the one I had just left. I shut the door behind me and sat at the table, staring at the wooden boards as if they could tell me what had happened. Hours passed, and I didn't move. The fire in the hearth went out, and I didn't notice. My lips wanted to form words, but no words came. Who could I tell? Who would believe me? Even I could barely believe myself. For days I said nothing to anyone. I carried it inside me like a burning coal, too hot to hold, but impossible to drop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The alpha lowering his head, the young wolf pressing his nose against my hand, the pack standing silent and calm, as though I belonged among them. I would wake in the night gasping, my face wet with tears I hadn't known were falling. Each time I left the cabin after that, my ears strained for the sound of them. I would pause in the middle of the path, breath held, waiting for a howl to break the silence. Sometimes the wind would rise and fool me, and my chest would leap with hope, but no voice came. They were gone. Day after day, week after week, I searched with my eyes, with my heart, but I never saw them again. The forest kept its secret. The wolves had vanished back into their world, leaving me behind with nothing but memory. And slowly, I began to understand. It was never meant to last. What happened in that clearing, what I was given, it wasn't something to keep. It was a gift, a revelation, a moment of grace offered by the wild, a gesture of gratitude from a life I had once saved, the kind of moment you are allowed to see only once in a lifetime. I realized then that I had not just witnessed survival, I had not just saved a starving pup, I had been shown something older, something I can barely name, the justice of nature, its memory, its hidden language of loyalty and acknowledgement. And though I never saw them again, the bond didn't break. It lived inside me, stronger than before. There are nights when I sit alone by the fire and my chest aches with the weight of it. I close my eyes and I can still hear them, the chorus of voices rolling across the hills, his voice among them, calling, not to the forest, not to the stars, but to me. And when that memory strikes, I tremble. My whole body shakes as if it cannot contain the truth, because I saw it with my own eyes. I saw a pack of wolves accept me. I saw them recognize me as their own, and I swear to you, there has never been a more shattering moment in my life. It is impossible, it cannot be, and yet it happened. I feel it even now, every time my hands shake, every time my chest fills with sobs. I cannot stop. I whisper to myself in the dark, I saw a pack of wolves bow to me. That does not happen, but I was there. I lived it. That is the blow that never softens. Not belief, but disbelief. Not comfort, but trembling awe. The memory is too strong to fade, too impossible to ignore. It has broken me open in ways I cannot explain. I walk through the world now as a different man, carrying a secret that makes my heart ache every day. Because I know, in the deepest marrow of my bones, that nature is wiser, more merciful, more mysterious than we can ever understand. And I was given proof. I was given a gift no words can contain. I saw a wild creature remember kindness. I saw him bring his family to show me their truth. I saw the law of the forest bend, if only for one trembling moment, to let me stand among them. And if my body shakes as I tell you this, if my eyes fill with tears, it is because I still cannot believe it myself. But I was there. I saw it, and it changed me forever. If your heart is racing right now, if you feel the weight of this truth, you understand. Subscribe to this channel. Here we tell the stories that prove nature is wiser than we are. I will carry this story until the day I die. It is not a tale I can share in the tavern or the market. People would laugh, shake their heads, call me mad. But in the quiet hours, when the fire burns low and the wind stirs the trees, I hear their silence again. I feel his touch on my hand, and I know, without a doubt, that I was chosen to see what few will ever see. The wolves remembered, they showed me, they accepted me, and I will never forget. If your heart is full of awe right now, write in the comments, nature is wiser than us.